Okay. Welcome in, everybody, to today's show on human risk management. We are here because Forrester has just made it official. Human risk management is its own category. Every other major analyst is in the process of creating their own post security awareness training category. We think that 2024 could be remembered as the year of human risk management. But what does that actually mean? And how will our definition of human risk management change with each analyst's own criteria and each vendor's own product offerings? Joining us today is a truly all-star panel of thought leaders on this topic. Let's begin with Chuck Brooks, the president of Brooks Consulting, a legend in this space. Chuck was named as the top cybersecurity expert to follow on social media by TechTarget, and also as one of the top cybersecurity leaders for 2024 by Cybersecurity Hub, in addition to a multitude of other awards and honors. Chuck has over 25 years experience in cybersecurity, emerging technologies, marketing, business development, and government relations. Chuck, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Also with us is Dan Lohrmann, a cybersecurity leader who has received multiple awards, including Public Official of the Year, CSO of the Year, and Computer World Premier 100 IT Leader. Dan has advised leaders in the White House and state, federal, and local government agencies. Dan is currently the field CISO for the public sector at Presidio after a long and storied career serving the state of Michigan as, by turns, the CISO, the CSO, and CTO. Dan, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Elliot, it's great to be back with you. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome here anytime, Dan. And last but absolutely not least is HawkSun's CISO advisor, Petri Kuivala, the former CISO of Nokia and NXP Semiconductors. Petri, it's great to have you here as always.
Thanks, Elliot. Great to be here again.
Okay, and I am your host, Elliot Baker, and we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. So first off, I think I'm going to direct this question to Chuck. Why do the major analysts create new categories like this with human risk management?
Well, first of all, kudos to Forrester. I mean, this really should have been done 2 decades ago. Really, the weakest link has always been the human, and many of the errors you find in breaches relate to some human oversight. So this is long overdue. And I think there's a tendency now with a lot of the emerging technologies coming online with automation, particularly artificial intelligence, that say, well, humans are less valuable. We don't really, the risk is taken out of it because we're looking at through algorithms. That's far from the truth. The fact is there still needs to be a human in the loop. Oversight is more critical than ever. Technologies are fallible. They can be misused. They can be programmed wrong, or there can be glitches. And we just recently saw, with an IT update on a patch. So it basically took out most of the workload. So I think that the human factor is something that we really need to focus on in everything we do with technology, particularly with cybersecurity. And it really is an understanding of what you're using and how you're using it and how you're orchestrating it. And the training and is really important, and creating parameters and advice and looking at the human factor from Forrester to do as a category is really invaluable.
Any follow-up to that from the panel?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think I totally agree with Chuck. I would say, Elliot, you and I have worked together for a few years now. And back in 2016, I wrote an article for CSO magazine that talked about the security awareness training needed new, stronger, and aid. So, I mean, the topic, I think we'll talk about some other technologies and new things that are happening in the last couple of years that have accelerated that. And we can do some of those details. But I totally agree with Chuck. This is something that has been around. Culture change has been, kind of the holy grail we've been talking about for 2 decades. I mean, literally, I remember webinars back in the 07, 08 timeframe. We talked about changing culture, and it was more than just a once a year. I think there was a big push away from, just once a year, bunch of questions, training, same thing, rinse and repeat, do it again next year kind of thing. And it just was not very effective. So there's a lot of reasons why this area is essential and important. And I think the traditional security awareness training, maybe we'll get into some of that in a few minutes, but just doesn't meet the need. While it checked a few boxes, there's a lot that are left to be desired. So this is a very important topic. It's people, process, technology. Been saying that for decades, but the people piece of it is 90%, and it's really, really important.
I fully agree with both of you guys, and I think that some of the main things there is, Chuck, you said about AI. I believe that when AI is in a game, we need actually not only the human oversight, but we can actually also release the human brain of helping the AI and then training them. In many cases, the human is still the best of actually understanding the behavior anomalies there. And the second thing that I would like to highlight here is that I believe why now is that finally the industry has also been able to somehow harness the behavior change. It is not just throwing the message to the people and wishing for the best. It is actually capable of showing real results by retraining our brains.
Yeah, excellent answers here. And I think that leads right into the next question we have, which is Richard Adescott at Gartner delivered a talk at the June Gartner Summit titled SAT is Dead. Now what? This kind of goes back a little bit to what Dan just said since 2016, writing about a need for a new approach to SAT. So Adescott is leading the creation of what Gartner calls the Security, Behavior, and Culture Program category. So is SAT dead? And if so, now what indeed? Let's throw that one over to Dan.
So the quick history, going back to 2016, Ellen, I worked previously for a security awareness training company. I don't anymore. That's a few years ago, but at the time, the big focus we're talking about, people were so tired of boring kind of, training that was once a year. And so the whole model then was kind of brief, frequent, focused, engaging training, gamified training, interactive training, keeping people's attention, making sure people were engaged. You were teaching people things they didn't already know. As Petri said, and I'm trying to elaborate on, there's a lot more to it now we can talk about, but really making sure the training was not watching a bunch of videos, taking a quick quiz, and then, see you again next year kind of thing. It needed to be year round. It needed to be engaging. It needed to be interactive. And I think that was a piece of this. It's not by far the whole thing. And I agree, there's a lot more to it than that today. I think we're going to dive into some of those, other ways you can measure it and additional technology we can apply to this to really help. But I mean, I think, the security awareness training is dead piece. People have been talking about that for a decade. And yet the reality, I also say, for those who are out there in this field, that this is your full-time job. Many companies, public and private sector, they have whole teams doing this for large enterprises. And it is important. I mean, so it's not dead in a sense of people are still requiring it from a compliance perspective. People are still complying it from a part of your job, and it's part of your performance appraisal. So in a sense, the old way of doing security awareness training is dead. And I think it's dying very fast in some organizations, not so fast in other organizations. That being said, it really is a new category, and there's a lot more to it than that. And there's a lot more we can do to measure success.
Yeah, something like this, that the king is dead, long live the king. I really think that the main difference there really is that in the past, it has been kind of compliance driven, and compliance has a kind of bad name here. Compliance instruments by themselves have always kind of highlighted that it needs to be risk-driven training, it needs to be risk-driven controls, but we as an industry haven't been able to actually prioritize those different behavior risks, and we haven't been able to address them. Now, as we are finally capable of actually addressing them in a relevant way, relevant from the individual point of view, relevant from the company point of view, then it starts to actually make sense. It is not just, as said earlier, on throwing the stuff into the wall and hoping it sticks.
Yeah, I agree with both. I think cybersecurity training is holistic and it's continually evolving. And we're learning more about some of the behaviors that resulted in breaches, and we're able to develop algorithms and programs just to alert people. And people say that you don't, awareness, it can be boring, but I think it's integral. And now with with a lot of the avatars and other things to make it interesting, the gamification, it changes it a little bit and makes it interesting. But really, we're talking about a bigger picture. Cybersecurity awareness affects the whole company. And I think part of the problem with the corporate world and government too, is they've looked at it as a cost item. for so many years. And really, cybersecurity awareness is the vitality of the business, the vitality of operations if you're a government. And you have to look at it in a higher order. And the more you train and aware of some of these things, you hopefully will delve deeper and get to understand that, to be really productive and capable and leading and actually profitable for your company, you're going to have to prioritize cybersecurity, and you're going to have to continue to update your training, and you're going to have to make sure that the people doing the administration know what they're doing. So I think anything that elevates it is good for cybersecurity.
So in order to elevate security awareness training into human risk management. So it sounds like this really is development and evolution of something. Chuck, your experience in trying to help cybersecurity companies to find value within the different vendors and approaches out there. What do you think the human risk management category should really strive for in order to distinguish itself from the old school SAT way?
Well, I think there's some sort of movements that have been more recent. I think that, the zero trust for one is a really good one. So I think that part of the thing of this awareness is understanding who's connected, why they're connected, what devices are connected. So that also leads into the behavioral aspects of it too. Why do you use this at 2 in the morning? What are you doing? Opening something that you shouldn't be opening. So I think a lot of those categories could be further developed now that we understand, with all the data coming in, be able to synthesize and using machine learning to understand some of those patterns. But we could develop a different kind of programs. I think also in human risk factors, you also have to understand that every industry is different. They have different parameters, different risks. So there's no one size that fits all. But I think it's really important, as we evolve and we're moving into this digital age, or we're not moving into, we're in it, but it's overwhelming everyone. And we have to look at, basically separating what we can do practically from what we want to do. So each industry has the ability to take advantage of some of these NIST frameworks or MITRE and others, or look what's best practices in their industry and collaborate. And I think that's the future. And you develop the understanding of what the human risks are by doing that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think there's a couple additional new technologies that are being rolled in. I won't talk about specific companies and names unless you want me to go into this, and I can. But acquisitions where, traditional security awareness training, but bringing in tool sets around email, around your office environment. We could start talking about different technologies, but everything we're doing, we're seeing that with technology. We mentioned AI, Copilot with Microsoft, and different tool sets that people have. But then the ability to say, hey, why is Dan getting an email from, this person, or the kinds of mistakes people make, like I'm sending to John Smith, whatever the name is, we're making that name up. Dan, why are you sending to his personal email? You should be sending that to his work email address, and those kinds of things. We have the technologies to be able to do that, to be able to look at your inbox and say, yeah, you do talk to John Smith a lot, but and you talk to him about football games. And we talked about football earlier. Football scores on his Gmail account or whatever, but his work stuff, and that spreadsheet you're sending, that shouldn't be going to his Gmail account. Those kinds of things. But we could go into lots of other examples around phishing, around spear phishing, around, we call it, whaling, even, going after the big fish, the whole business email compromise, the BEC, which is a huge deal, by the way. The fraud that can happen, and the ability to bring in, hey, this $1 million, whatever they're claiming, is probably not legitimate because of these reasons. And in the same way that technology, banks can go out and verify very quickly if they want to give you a credit card, line of credit, those kinds of things. We can use those technologies to determine, not 100%, because not 100%, but we can use it to vastly increase the likelihood of detecting fraud and be able to notify people real time of those. So those human risks that we have, come together with the technologies we can bring to bear, the artificial intelligence, the Gen AI kinds of technologies, and also the ability to detect fraudulent websites around the internet, fraudulent certificates, all kinds of different ways that the bad actors try to attack us, and then bring that information to bear real time to help people make right decisions.
Absolutely so. And let me try to bring another type of corner here. Dan already talked a lot about the kind of social engineering side, and you were referring to the few other behaviors. I believe that there is a opportunity now for us really widening our net of taking it kind of all sort of kind of social engineering related topics. Is it about using USB sticks? Is it about sharing the data over the kind of consumer cloud services or many other sort of things? Something that you can obviously also prevent with technology, but most of the companies cannot fully enforce technological protections. That's why I believe that the combination of AI and the different kind of platforms are capable of providing CISOs and CISO teams some sort of kind of binoculars to see that where do we have pockets of people who are behaving in an undesired manner. By purpose, by the way, not saying that they are not behaving correctly. They might be behaving correctly from the business point of view. They are just not behaving in a desired manner from the security point of view. And the next step is when that is surfaced, the CISO team should actually make some sort of analysis why I'm behaving differently, and then helping them to resolve that issue. It's not usually because they would be stupid or something, but because they just have been tasked to do something which from the business point of view. So, on my opinion, it's going beyond of technology. It helps the CISO teams to find pockets of people to help them becoming finally a kind of nurse or doctor instead of police officer.
I like it. And I think what's really interesting about what you guys just talked about, going from Chuck talking about the technologies and talking about the technologies and Petri mentioning the different kinds of risks, I kind of want to first pause on the risks. So when we're talking about human risk management, what do you think is the most important risk to start with when we're talking about human risk management? Maybe start with Chuck on that.
I think, again, when you're looking at human risk, you have to look at the very basics, depending what you are, how advanced you are as a company, what you need to do. And really that is administrative access, who has access to do the damage. So if you're running a company and you have people who has access to the secure data, what are the rules around that data? Is it firewalled? Is it encrypted? All the basics, I think you need to look at. And I think that is all looking strictly at the people who have the responsibility to do that and why they should have the responsibility. Because I think that part starts at the top. If you don't have that correct front, you're going to run into a lot of problems later on. And that's a problem with a lot of companies because there's not enough cybersecurity experts and a lot of people leave because there's not a lot of longevity in a lot of these positions because they're receiving other offers or whatever. But I think you have to have that up front. And then you develop a downside to the risk management platform and all people associated with it and do your policies. But those are the starting points.
Yeah, I mean, boy, that's a great answer. It's interesting. The natural instinct for any CISO would be, start with the data, right? What's the most critical data? And we could dive into that, know your crown jewels, know what data you have, know how you're protecting it. But I also want to say, and Chuck made me think on that answer, it's also about the people piece and literally their safety. So we always say, the people themselves, and you can't just assume, well, come on, Dan, you're in your office. What risk could happen? More and more, we have geolocation data. We have data around, we go to the airports right now. We do, eye scan, retina scans, to bypass the TSA line, right? If you've got different types of biometrics, you can use your hand fingerprints. They have obviously more and more camera data. So, I mean, protecting people in different situations, again, as Chuck mentioned, depending on what industry you're in, whether you're in government, public sector, private sector, there are a lot of jobs themselves. For example, I work a lot with governments protecting police. They have those cameras, and when they're walking up to a vehicle, there's a lot of people side aspects to physical protection. That when you really talk about a secure culture, it really is everything involved with people on the go, people traveling. We used to say a lot in security awareness training, a little side, veer off a little bit here for you, Elliot, but we used to talk about the people who were the best at security awareness going back decades were the ones that also were practicing things at home with their families, with their kids. More and more we've got hybrid work environments, people working from home. So you have a lot of complexities around different working situations in the office, out of the office, on the go, people working on vacations from other parts of the world. How do you know, is this legitimate traffic? Well, normally it would not be, but Dan's on vacation in Europe and maybe it's legitimate this week because he's responding to something from, Germany or something. So, I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to this, Clearly, it's about the risk to the data, but also protecting your people and training your people and helping them understand how this really is all about their culture, both at home and at work, and how you can help protect them. And making it, let's say this real last point, making sure that people see the value in it, because some of the best people we had that were the best ambassadors in government and around that I've seen give talks with like a nurse who had identity stolen was then talking to a group of nurses about the importance of this. And wow, was that effective? I mean, so effective because they were listening to one of their own in a business context, talking about their situations versus some guy who's being paid to come in and talk at them, who they perceive as, yeah, that's your job. You're the chief security officer, right? So, I mean, trying to get the business excited about the importance of this and how it impacts their daily jobs is really, really a big piece of the culture change.
That's interesting piece that you just brought it up. It's all about the relevance to myself, relevance to my landscape that I'm accountable for. And starting from the original question earlier that you had, what are the risks? I think as kind of pretty experienced CISO that the main four risks are that you need to make sure that you protect the revenue generation capability of the company, usually coming from the OT area. Then there is obviously the information that Dan was actually talking about there. The information can be about the long-term innovation, or it can be actually about the operations, managing your data that you're kind of given to. Or then the third part is that you are still protecting the future sales by protecting the brand, the customer loyalty basically there. Or the fourth part is that if you are working in the regulated industries, that you are still compliant with all the requirements that you have to be able to operate. So those are the kind of the four main things. Obviously, then when you are getting a bit closer to the end users and individuals, I still believe that about 40% of the stuff is related to the social engineering in one or another form. Then there is plenty of other type of behaviors. And as correctly Chuck and Dan both actually highlighted it varies between the companies. So what will be changing with the HRM is that we are not anymore providing blanket solutions that are the same for all the companies, but it's going to be much more tailored for each company's needs.
Yeah, right. And that's a good place to kind of pause and talk on a little bit more there. So you're a CISO, you're a security leader, you are tasked with protecting your company. And now, obviously, with HRM becoming an actual category, it's been identified that we need to do a better job protecting people than the security awareness training category has been doing. So if you have an HRM platform, Dan, and you're really looking for something that you can really take a bite out about that one area of risk, what would you love for an HRM platform to do better or do differently than what you've been able to do before, like an SAT platform?
I think the lead into this topic, and one of the things that Forrester highlights is being able to measure things better. We're so good at measuring risk, and I love the fact that people talk about it's risk management. Really, it's not cybersecurity. It's obviously all of the above. It'd be great if we could measure risk at the same way we measure our financial performance or the sales numbers every month. We're so big at those weekly update sales meetings if you're in the private sector and you're selling it, whatever you're selling. And, the projections, why do we, the numbers last month, the numbers next month, how are we doing for the quarter? How are we doing for the year? How are we doing compared to last year? How are sales? And there's so much focus on that. But so the ability to measure in meaningful ways, the ability to really change behaviors in meaningful ways. And this is where we get into some areas. Maybe we'll get into a little bit more in one of your later questions, but we may have some disagreement. I mean, we've all agreed on everything so far, but what are the best ways to change behaviors? And there's different theories on that as well. But some of it is pretty black and white. Some of it is maybe not so much. So you want to have the right behaviors around security, around employees doing the right thing in different situations. But you also want to be able to say, okay, there need to be consequences with that. You also want to be enabling innovation. You want to be enabling thought leadership. You don't want that employee to be, okay, you caught them doing something they shouldn't do, and now I'm going to fire them. Well, that was one of your best people. Do you really want to fire them? I mean, those are really tough questions to answer. We can get into some of that in a minute, but those are just a few of the things. The ability to know, measure risk, to when you see something that needs to change, be able to do it specifically in an enabling way that we can get employees engaged and not discouraging them. I mean, making it a positive thing if possible. Sometimes it needs to be a negative thing, but then being able to change behaviors.
Yeah, I love it. There's no problem here if we want to open up the panel with some disagreements here as well, because I think that's what everyone is going to have their own kind of a background, their own perspective on this. So I heard from you, Dan, just now a lot about behavior change and what we're really trying to do with HRM. Let's see if we can all agree on that. I think the unifying thread between what Gartner and Forrester, Frost and Sullivan, eventually G2 are going to be looking at is behavior change. And there's some pretty fundamental disagreements between the different platforms on which behaviors are most important to change. But let's pause on what Dan just brought up. How do you change behavior with a platform? Do we all agree that it starts with measurement, first of all? In order to get to behavior change, do you need to start with measurement?
How would you be able to change something if you don't understand it first?
Yeah.
So obviously, yes, measurement. What I would like to pick on what Dan said is the word consequence, because I think that by default somehow we cybersecurity professionals are having a mindset of a police officer who wants to punish and penalize and whatsoever. We talk easily about how we help, but at the end of the day, we are trying to find the criminals there. I used to be a police officer long ago, so I guess it's fair for me to say so as well. But anyway, I don't think that the consequence conversation should be in the beginning at all. We should always measure, then understand. Then when we understand, we should ask the question why. When we understand the why, we should be helping the people to guide them. And if the guidance is not enough, most probably we need to actually build them some specific solutions that are capable of helping them to behave securely. They rarely behave securely because they don't want to do so. They behave securely for multiple other good reasons. And that's, in my opinion, one of the main things here that we really need to start to from the enablement helping perspective first, and only at the end of the conversation move into the consequences.
Yeah.
Beyond the measuring.
And I agree. Incentives tend to work better in this case. And how do you hold consequences for something that is so difficult to defend against? Particularly, I think we're in a new era of social engineering with generative AI, and the capabilities of the adversaries are so much greater than they were just a few years ago. And pretty much anyone could go to the dark web with a generative AI and become an expert pretty quickly and a threat. So I think, one of the first things you really need to do in the human thing is try to get a better understanding of how to recognize, spoofs, deep fakes, all these things that could be, at risk to your company. And that's just not an easy task. So you can't really necessarily hold the employees accountable for something that is beyond their capabilities. But you could, if you deter some, and if you look at ways, okay, well, maybe we should not isolate, we should have this segmented or not go to this website or whatever. It's something you get some rules based on what your company does and need to follow those lanes. You could do stuff. And then the more and more you train people on this, the better they're going to get. Again, nothing is infallible, but they're going to get better at understanding that threat. So I think incentives are always good.
Beautiful point of my opinion. I don't think that this is a cognitive problem at all. People know, they just react to the different stimuli that they have in front of them. And our thing here is with this new category actually to retrain the brain to react differently to these stimuli. And that requires actually multiple things that have been backed up by the behavior sciences there. It's not only of having kind of constant repetition, it's all about actually making it very relevant for you. Relevant actually also from the point of view that how difficult it is. If it's way too difficult for you personally, you are going to be frustrated. If it's way too easy for you, you are going to be frustrated again. So the system needs to actually understand who is Dan, who is Chuck, who is Elliot, and based on that, provide those exercises. And hopefully it's going to be even just in time, so that whenever you are doing something, let me react immediately and then help you. And then we are starting to actually change the behaviors. We are starting to change the mindsets, and we are starting to engage the people with us.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff there. And I think that we all seem to be pretty much in agreement, or you experts seem to be pretty much in agreement as far as what we're trying to do. And now how to do it. What technologies can we use to actually create that behavior change? What are the things that you are excited about seeing? Chuck, you mentioned about some of the age of AI creating a really advanced threat landscape. how can, whatever technology, we obviously default to AI, but what are the different applications of these advanced technologies for defensive purposes when it comes to defending our human layer?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of those technologies obviously could recognize anomalies pretty quickly. They can be helpful in discerning false positives, what really might be a false positive, what might not be, what makes the job easier for analysts. So that's really good. And also, obviously, in helping write reports, the generative AI. But I think in the training part, that is, augmented reality, virtual reality. Some of these new technologies coming on with the integration where you continually improve and work. I think that's the future of all this, because you just don't have the resources and the people to do it continually. But if you had your own capability, put your ear set or your goggles on, you continually do it, and it's fun. You're gonna be more apt to do that, and you're gonna learn more too. So I think some of those are starting to come online. They're not quite there yet, but I think we're gonna have to do that in our new artificial intelligence era.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that enabling, Petra was mentioning earlier, the ability in the future for different roles, role based, but also different people. I mean, I think, specialization, even as we have more and more segmentation of our networks, you have segmentation of people in a positive way, almost like in school, learning, education, tailoring, some child's ahead in reading, another child's ahead in writing, another one's ahead in math, and then being able to tailor the questions and the problems to their ability so that they can improve at the optimum level. Being able to do that with employees and staff around people, process, and technology that brings it all together, I think it's pretty exciting. I'll just throw out here, Elliot, one area you mentioned about disagreement. I don't know how much more time we're going to have. I think where I sometimes disagree with others in the industry, just so people are out there, people are wondering where might there be disagreements. A few years ago, I wrote an article. You can go back and read my Government Technology Magazine blogs and also my CSO Magazine blogs on this, but where the just-in-time training was literally when somebody made a mistake, certain people were getting very minimal amount of awareness training. But when somebody made a mistake with phishing, they put them immediately into kind of like, I call it purgatory, but they put them into this, environment where they couldn't do anything. And then they had to, immediately take a class that was 30 minutes. And then if they didn't take the class or they didn't do X, Y, and Z, then they would literally, in some cases, more severe punishments, up to including dismissal. I mean, over like missing a phishing link kind of thing. I attribute it to almost like way back in the day, taking a dunce cap and putting on a kid and saying, stand in the corner and this is going to make you better. I don't like that kind of punishment around, I made a mistake. Therefore, just in time training. And then it was used in a context. In one example, I'll just say, you can go back and read these studies. This is going back about 6 or 7 years, but there's still some of this thinking out there where, rather than giving 100,000 people an hour of training, now we only have to give them 15 minutes of training, and we're going to give the few bad apples a much more extensive thing. And I just saved 100,000 hours. So I just saved how many millions of dollars and all of this. A lot of that I thought was a lot of rubbish. And I did not buy into that. I felt like it was hocus pocus. And so I'm all for just-in-time training in certain contexts. And I know different people disagree with me on this, but I have some studies backing up my viewpoint on this as well. I just think we need to get to a smarter way of disabling the bad and enabling the good, and really helping using technology to tailor for every employee. This technology is moving so fast. We need to all be learners all the time. I can learn from Chuck and Petra and you, Elliot, every day. Next week, I'm going to the CISO Academy at the FBI. I mean, I want to always be learning more what the bad guys are doing and how we can most effective people, process, and technologies to be most effective in what we're trying to get done and then what we're trying to stop.
I agree with you in that context. What I would like to highlight is that we humans, we make mistakes. I can make any one of you make the mistake. I can make any CEO making a mistake. It's pretty stupid, in my opinion, of having those punishments for the people who are people. They are usually making mistakes because they are just busy. They are trying to do the best at work. They have some other worry on their head. Their mother has just kind of recently got ill or whatever it is. And then punishing people for being people is pretty damn stupid. We should be able to build resilience. When someone makes a mistake, hopefully then technology or another people next to you is capable of actually helping you, because tomorrow you will need the help. And that's the role where we need to kind of bring in the AI, humans, and technology all together, of helping us all from being humans.
I agree with both Petri and Dan. I guess we're not going to disagree on anything today.
Please do.
I mean, you're right. Anyone can be fit. No one is invulnerable to it. And in fact, I
Wow.
just remember a few years ago, I was working for a company which won't name. They said they're going to do a phishing test, and beware, in the next few days it'll happen. And sure enough, everyone got an email one day from the CFO saying their 401k is being moved to a different platform, and they needed to click on this link. 95% of the people in the company clicked on the link. I mean, it's just too easy. So you're exactly right. You need to have a fail-safe, a resilience plan, or have someone in your administration to be able to stop those emails before they make it to the employees. But phishing is almost impossible in a sense to stop everything. And particularly when you're dealing with state actors now and dealing with polymorphic warfare, malware rather, it's just too much to do. So I mean, you want to just make sure you're not low-hanging fruit and do the most you can to make sure the non-professionals don't get you. But it's just really, really difficult, and no one should be punished for mistakes that everyone would make.
I look at the Forrester bullets on this topic, and they say number 3, educating and enabling the workforce. And I think that's a big piece of it. I do think one other piece we haven't mentioned, Elliot, there are going to be some bad apples in there this is not a mistake. They are actually deliberately trying to steal data, or they're going to jump to a competitor, or there's intellectual property that they're trying to download or offload or upload or whatever they're trying to do. And you also need to detect them as well. So, even though that may be less than 1%, it may be a very, very small, maybe one person, that one person can cause a lot of damage. So part of this has to be also finding that needle in the haystack. And so that's what makes it so challenging. I think this is going to be an evolving field. It is getting more complex, and yet it really fundamentally still is about people and training them. So, Petri, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I want to jump in. I believe that there's kind of 2 ways of finding the needle from the haystack easier. You can either find a kind of solution that finds the needle from the haystack in a reliable way, or you can actually reduce the size of the hay in the stack. And I think that that's what we are doing here with the HRM. If you are capable of making 95% of the people behaving in a more correct way, that reduces the noise at the tables of the security operating center guys, which enables them to actually use existing tools like a DLPs and etc. of actually finding the needles from the much more smaller haystack. That's my point in here.
Oh, that's funny. I haven't heard that before. Yeah. Reduce the hay, reduce the noise.
I love it. I used a similar analogy a few years back. It's like, how do you find a needle in a haystack? People say, well, you burn down the haystack. That's what people say that. or you take every piece of hay in the haystack, you make them an enabling frontline person, because they're the ones that most likely are going to be the ones. I started my career at the National Security Agency, NSA. We have the Robert Hansen stories and all these stories, but they talk about, how they found these spies at places like NSA and stuff. And you read those books, and it's people in the front lines of working with them were the ones that ended up being the ones that did it, that found out, that saw the behavior change. And so, making the 99.9% of the employees, enabled to be able to do the right thing, enabling them and then teaching them to watch out for abnormalities. And that's, making them ambassadors for the cyber program. I think that's really what our goal should be.
Absolutely good. One good way of doing so. My only word of caution is that don't make it as an East Germany type of exercise.
Sorry about that analogy, but that's my background. Came from the 3-letter agency world, so, but not so much anymore. But having everybody involved is really the goal.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of good algorithms out there for behavioral threat analysis now that help enable. When you have the smaller pie, what you're looking at, it's much easier to discover it. And combining the human, which is important, particularly in those roles that you're talking about. But again, not for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I just have to say one thing. We had one experience that's relevant here with Qualcomm, who Petri actually worked with at some point. But They took their actual fishing prison, which I think Dan called purgatory. Some people call it the fishing prison. And they took these people who were their worst offenders, and they failed 3 in a row. They never really responded. Every time they got the phishing simulation, they failed it pretty much. They clicked it. So they took 1,000 of them, put them on a new security behavior change program. Happened to be HawkSense, a company man, sorry. But then they put the rest of the 48,000 people on their legacy SAP, won't say which one it is. The fishing prison that population went from being, I think, 2 or 3 times the failure rate and very little engagement to having twice as good failure rate after just a couple of months. The model just wasn't working for them for whatever reason. For most of the people, it was like not great, but okay. But for these people, it just wasn't changing behavior. And that's a great example of how you can get these kind of results, get these measurements to really show if something is working, why it's not working, who is it not working for, and what can you do to change it. But, we have just a couple more minutes here. So I want to just go to this kind of final question here. Is it hype? Is it hope? What is human risk management to you? What do you think this signifies? You've been doing this a long time, all three of you. Have you seen other categories emerge that have been hype? Have you seen some emerge that have been real hope, real benefits for the industry? We can go around as you please. Whoever wants to jump in first. What's the hype and what's the hope possibility here?
Well, I don't think it's hype at all. Again, it's the human is the weakest point again, and the most important point at the same time. So you can't overhype that, and training is essential. So, it's fundamental. So, like I said, I'm surprised it hasn't been a category earlier, but it really is. And again, we're talking about the integration of a lot of these new advanced technologies mixing with that still, elevates, I think, the importance of the human in the loop, not diminishes it. So I think the timing is right because we have to really look at the new landscape we're working in right now and look at where we need to allocate resources and where we create our new risk management profiles. But, they're going to be using these tools and they have to understand these tools. And again, it goes back to the human in the loop.
I would agree. I mean, I don't think it's hype. I think it is hope. I do think, as everything Chuck said, I won't repeat it, but I agree with everything he said. I would just add that this is an evolving world we live in around, the technology, people process technology is changing so dramatically. The way we do, who would have predicted COVID, right? A few years ago in 2019, nobody. Who would have predicted, the move to work from home and then kind of move back. There's so many different changes are happening all around us, around the world. And the technology is changing too. And so the bad actors that, we're going to get better at this and then they're going to adjust. And then, that's why I love Elliot. We have this plug in for our CISO. CISOs, we have fantasy football because so many football analogies you and I have done together with different articles around how it's football. The offense adjusts, the defense has to adjust. The defense adjusts, the offense has to adjust it. And I think that's going to continue to happen. So I don't think it's going to be an end all. Will the category be renamed again in 5 or 8 years? Probably. But for now, this is the right thing. I think it does need to bring in all aspects of behavior change and culture, security awareness training is a component of that, but it's not the whole piece. It's not, so I think this is absolutely the right thing at the right time. It is late. I agree with Chuck. It should have been a few years back, and it will probably evolve again into something different 5 to 8 years from now because the technology is going to continue to evolve.
I think that there is always hype in the beginning of this sort of movement. And it's great because that creates the awareness, people being interested about the topic. I don't think that any of the vendors are still capable of delivering all the dreams. But we need to dream to be able to actually implement them. But yes, this is absolutely hope. I've been in a CISO roles for about 20 years. And it has been crazy how the people have been neglected in the whole way. I'm so hopeful that we finally are capable of bringing the people and the brains of the people in masses to help the technology and the processes. And then it's finally becoming kind of complete.
I think that is a great and hopeful note to end on, that we all believe that HRM is a significant hope for the industry here going forward. Okay, everybody. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. I can't thank you enough, Chuck, Dan, and Petri, for joining us. I thought this was a fantastic session. I learned a
very
lot. I
much.
think that our audience really learned a lot. I think that this is something that we could probably talk on monthly. It's going to be changing. A lot's going to be happening here. So really happy to have you all here.
Yeah.
It is.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Guys,
guys.
appreciate it.
thanks for
Appreciate
bringing-
all you're doing, Elliot.
Yeah, you too.
Hey,
Thanks.
guys,
See you guys.
Have a great week.
Thanks
Take
a
care.
lot.
Thanks a lot.